back, the Agent and the Fan podcast. I'm Chris Leible. I'm the agent. I'm with my buddy Lu Columna. He's the fan. And we have a special show today. We thought we were done with the Mets because we just had Tim Healy from Newsday on. But then in the middle of the night,
like a movie.
in the middle of the night, like only crazy things happen. Elections now, used to be only Venezuela. Now they're happening in the United States, but crazy things happen. Willie Randolph. It's a whole bunch of crazy things. So in the middle of the night, the Mets, we got some crazy news that Carlos Correa, who everybody had thought signed with the Giants, ended up signing with the Mets, or agreeing to terms with the Mets, we'll say, because that's the best way to say it, just because of this exact circumstance of what happened with the Giants. And we're going to get into that with Anthony DiComo, who'll be joining us shortly. So it's going to be exciting. But we're going to wait. We'll wait for Anthony to come on to talk about that and how that all happened. Lou, how you doing? It's been a crazy week. We got Christmas coming up here, and I know we've talked a little bit about it off, but like it's crazy as a dad getting ready here.
Man, it's been crazy.
Getting ready for Christmas is a crazy time of year for anybody. And so, yeah, I mean, we got a lot cooking, but the baseball hot stove is not slowing down. And so we got a lot of stuff to talk about. We got a lot of stuff to catch up on because it'll be our last one before before Christmas comes. And, it's getting crazy.
Yeah. Like you said earlier, a lot of things happening in the middle of the night. I know you woke up to it. You woke me up to it. It was, who would have thought, right? I think the last time I remember something like this happening was, A-Rod to the Yankees, where everybody thought he was going to the Red Sox, and then, we know what happened, right? We know the history of that. So it's a little crazy, man. But this is the time of season. This is the hot stove league. Crazy things happen. I think right now we're probably looking, now past these signings of Swanson and Rodon and Correa. I think you'll probably start seeing a lot of trades happen. I mean, more than I, but I think that's kind of where we're headed now.
Yeah, there's still some free agents out there. A lot of the big ones are off the board now. So, it should still be interesting. One thing about baseball kind of does quiet down. This is the one time a year that people who work in baseball get to have a little downtime. And although there are some psychos still working, I know this has always been a good time for me to kind of ramp it down for a little between Christmas and New Year, and just kind of regroup and get your head back on off the swivel, and and so that's one thing about baseball. I think a lot it goes on in the real world too, but in the baseball world, for sure. So I think it will quiet down around now, straight through New Year, and then it should pick up again.
So as an agent, which is a great question, as an agent, a great point rather, when you don't have a player signed, how uneasy is this time a year?
It depends on the personality of the player. With a lot of the players, sometimes the guys are more chill than others, more tranquilo, as we say. But it just depends on the person. And but also the game has changed quite a bit from even when I first started in this back in the early 2000s when I first began. If you weren't signed by the winter meetings, it was like, oh my God, what's going on here? Am I even going to get a chance? Now you're even seeing the players purposely strategically wait things out. So I don't think it's kind of an interesting time to be in this, and everybody's got a different view of it.
Yeah.
And I think each agent does, and each player does too. For me, I always, try and go with the personality of my player, and who you have to be on top of, and who you can kind of let things go. And it just
with the player who is uneasy, right? Let's say you have player X. He's a little uneasy because he hasn't been signed. How do you navigate that with him? Because I'm assuming he's anxious. You don't want to be anxious for him. So you try to be even.
No, you have to take a step back from it and you try and get them to understand that as well. Sometimes easier said than done. Sometimes you can do it for a period of time, and then their true personality might come out, and they're really
Yeah.
excited to see what's going on and want to know. Some people just want to know. Some people are just more relaxed and know, hey, it's coming, it's just a matter of time. And that's kind of what I would usually try to tell them, but I always, the one thing is you always want to be honest with them. You don't want to tell them, don't worry about it. We got something, we'll get something. If, especially if, you're not really sure about that. So,
So
you want to be honest, and you want to, I think the most important thing is communication,
so at this time of year, is it more about the roster spot, like wanting to secure a roster
can be,
spot
it just depends on who.
more than money?
Yeah, well, it just depends. It depends on the guy. Um, I think to me, the roster spot's so important, just because
Without
these
question.
teams do, map these things out, and it almost, because sometimes you're competing in spring training, and a lot of times, yeah, you can earn your way onto a team, but a lot of times they do have the scenarios in mind, and they kind of stay with those. So it is important, but obviously money's important too. And if you have the right player or the person who feels like, hey, don't worry about it, just get me as much money as possible, I'll go in and make the team. You do your job, I'll do mine.
So
So
where do you think Michael Conforto? Because I think that's probably the biggest name and the biggest unknown, right? Is
yeah.
going to be able to play every day? How often is he going to be able to play? I think if we
Well, it's such a
had a
unique
clearer record,
scenario.
yeah.
Yeah, because guys don't usually sit out years and get back on track. So um, Scott Boras had a strategy here, and again, maybe it's working perfectly. Maybe it's not. I think some people would say it isn't. Some people might say, hey, he knows what he's doing. We'll see how it plays out. But I think for him, he's got to see what's out there, go what's best for him. To me, it would probably behoove him to get a good place to play, good opportunity to play regularly and show what he can do. Obviously, he's a talented player who's put up good numbers in the past. If he can do that again and rebound to where he was a few years ago, because his last year wasn't his best year, then he could line himself up for one of these great contracts that we're seeing this offseason.
No, I think so too. I mean, I think that it's imperative for him to get on a team where he knows he's going to play every day. I don't think, which is why he probably didn't sign with Houston, was that he was going to get a chance in Houston to play every day, right? On a contending team who needs him. Whereas if he goes to a team that doesn't necessarily need him to win, he can build up his value,
Yeah.
for a midseason trade. I think we've spoken about this before. So I
Yeah.
think that's important. I mean, listen, you were able to get Joey Gallo $11 million. You know what I mean? Scott Boras to me is the executive of the year. Period. He's done such an amazing job, and that's what he's paid to do. That's
Yeah.
why his clients stick with him. That's why he's been so successful, right? He knows he knows the pressure points.
Some of his clients do, some of his clients do, some don't.
Yeah.
Everybody, but obviously he's uber successful and has done a great job. So we'll see how Conforto plays out. Conforto's been a very, very unique situation. You don't usually see something like this. I know earlier in his career he had a couple of these types of things. Scott did, but this one's real unique. So it's exciting. It's going to be exciting to see how it plays out. Obviously, I think a lot of Michael as a ball player, and I think he's a guy who certainly can come back and young enough and certainly talented enough to do it. So we'll see how it goes. Changing subject briefly, really sad news of the week is Franco Harris passing away. He had just done a radio show the day before, and to lose an icon like this just days before his jersey was supposed to be retired and was supposed to, the 50th anniversary of probably the most famous play in the history of football.
Voted the most famous.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just what a tragedy, what a loss for the football world and just for the sports world in general. A great man and certainly a great player that if you look at his stats and his numbers and all the things that have come out in the last last day or so. Just incredible for those who are too young or don't remember. I mean, his accolades are off the charts and just an iconic figure in the history of sports.
Yeah, I think it's more tragic, more so because this was so long overdue. You know,
Yeah.
that's, had he had this a couple of years ago, he would have felt that. I mean, he felt the love, of course, of the fan base because they love him. But to have his moment and share it with his family, and now to have that be gone, I think that is for a
Just
lot of
knowing it was coming and for not to get it is just a shame.
yeah,
I can't look. uh, I know a lot of people have said a lot of things about the Steelers, and obviously the Steelers are well known as being one of the
class
classiest
organization.
organizations in all of sports and have been for years. The Rooneys are just, beyond above and beyond just outstanding, owners and people in the sports business. But
And in the
it's
future,
been, for it not to be retired. People have criticized this and said, "Why did it take so long?" But I'm not going to criticize it because it's hard to read in football, especially. And look at the Steelers. I mean, their team is stocked with Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer. Those teams in the 70s and early 80s are so above and just beyond um, the superstars. So you can't retire all the numbers, or you're going to be guys will be it's going to be the number 103 is going to be running with the ball or something one day. So
yeah, I
it's
mean,
it's
I understand. I understand that, but they have such a rich history uh, that you really have to kind of think about that, right? Like, yeah, they're not the Buccaneers, right? They're the Steelers, and I think you got to honor that.
But
And
that's part of the thing because obviously you have Terry Bradshaw and Mean Joe, and
Lynn
Franco. I
Swan,
mean, those are the top guys. What's that?
Lynn Swan,
But yeah, Lynn Swan doesn't get that same. I don't think just because he had. I don't think he had the length body of work
yes,
of the
yes,
other guys. So I think he's never. But I mean, you look at the other Jack Lambert, Jack Ham, L.C. Greenwood. Mike Webster. I mean, on and on and on. You can go Mel Blunt, Donnie Shell. I mean,
how long
it's
is it
just
going to take for Ben?
insane.
You think?
What's that?
How long do you think it's going to take Ben?
Ben has got to be going to be, right alongside those guys. But I'm just saying, just on those teams alone, you can't retire 11 numbers or whatever number of players we just said. It's just very rare that you do that. So, it's these decisions aren't made. I mean, they take a lot of time to make these decisions, and I'm gonna give the Steelers the benefit of the doubt on that. I'm not gonna knock it because it's just not a common thing to have guys' numbers retired. It's very rare, and usually a lot of them are just put out of commission and not officially retired. And I think that's kind of what's been with Franco. It's just sad. It's very sad, and it's just sad because he seemed to have a lot of life left in him, and it's gonna be a rough night when they do.
It's going to be very emotional. Very
Very
emotional.
emotional for those guys and just for everybody, even seeing some of the younger players who knew him or got to know him. And it's just so tragic. 72 years old, not
Oh,
not
that's
a
young.
kid,
Young.
not
Yeah,
a kid, but
that's
certainly
young.
seemed to be very, very full of life. So very sad. Lou, you wanted to talk about something. I wasn't that into talking about it. Go ahead, just say it.
So this is on a funny note. I was on my phone and I saw something and I forwarded it to you right away. Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Somebody tries to break into his house, and Chris, take it away.
Well, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, first of all, is a WWE legend. I'm a huge WWE fan. I usually like the bad guys. He was pretty much a good guy, so he wasn't one of my favorites, but certainly appreciation for him. And he walked around with the 2x4 and yelled, "Hey-o!" So this is no surprise to what happened, but apparently he was confronted, and Lou, I mean, as you would imagine, even though he's not a kid, it didn't end well for the person who confronted him. Anthony DiComo is here. Anthony, thank you so much for joining the show. It's the Agent of the Fan podcast. I'm Chris Leible. That's my partner, Lu Columna. Lou is the fan. Anthony and I have known each other a long time. Anthony, I don't know how long have we known each other? Do you have any idea?
I started in 2007 doing this, and I want to say I met you pretty early on. I know
Yeah.
my mentor Marty Noble thought the world of you, and I
Yes.
think he
Right.
probably introduced us at some point. But yeah, it's been probably 15 years, I would say.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Marty sadly passed away. Was a great guy, and certainly a legend in New York. And just to set the state, Anthony is the Mets beat writer for Mets.com and has been for a long time. And actually, now that you say that, totally remember. And he actually told me, Marty had called me and he said, "Hey, there's a young guy who's going to be working with me." I don't know if I ever told you this. He said, "There's a young guy who's going to be working with me. If you could help, anytime you can help him out, if you could, I'd appreciate it." And Marty was he was a legend. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe talk about Marty for a second.
Yeah, he was. What's funny is I told this story a few times when he passed, but before I met Marty, I had heard stories about Marty because I got an internship with MLB.com, and they said to me, Marty, as you know, Chris was a little old school. He did things his own way. He's sort of
Big time.
to the beat of his own drummer. And MLB.com, my employer, knew that, and they said, "Well, look, you're starting this internship. The Mets are starting on the road. Why don't you go to Yankee Stadium for their homestands? Learn the ropes under Brian Hoke, who is a new beat writer there, and get to know the lay of the land, what we do, all that sort of thing." And so I did that. And when I'm at Yankee Stadium and getting to know Brian and other people, I just kept hearing all these, not horror stories, but all these stories about Mario's idiosyncrasies and things like that. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, what am I about to walk into? And, a week later, I go to Shea Stadium for the first time and I meet Marty and I'm like, you're not at all like they described you. It's funny because he can definitely, he had a temper. He had all of his idiosyncrasies, as I said, but he was a very kind man. The story you just told about reaching out to you, he did that. He paved the way for me in a lot of places, so I'm very thankful to him for that. And miss him all the time.
He's actually a neighbor of mine. He actually
Right.
lives pretty close to me, and I know when I was working for the Mets, he would call me. "I'm not coming out there. Can you bring the media guys home with you? I'll come to your house and pick them up." So I would bring the media, back then I'd bring the media guys home, the full set for him and everything, and he was always appreciative. And then every once in a while I'd drop by his house or he'd drop by my house or whatever, and we'd always catch up. He was a great guy, but he did. I mean, he had a long career in the newspaper biz as a writer and covering the Mets and Yankees, and really a good dude. We sadly lost him a few years back, and it's crazy. I didn't realize he had passed away. I found out. I was talking to Jay Horowitz, and Jay was like, "I'm coming back from Marty's funeral," and I was like, "Marty's funeral? What do you?" And I had just seen him a couple weeks before that. I was at his house. I had to drop something off at his house, and I was just like, "What?" I had no idea, and it was very sad. I remember Marty. My first spring training went down with the Mets when I was still working for the Mets in the front office, and I was sitting with them in the press box, and it was like 100 degrees out. We were in Vieira, where the at the time I think the Marlins were there, and he was like, "Let's see who can keep their finger on this metal long enough." And him and I were doing it, trying to keep our finger on the metal and see before our fingers got burned. He was a unique guy, Marty. Very interesting character for sure. So Lou, obviously we want to talk to Anthony about the big story. So Anthony, a couple of days ago we had actually end of last week, we thought we had the Mets covered, and we had Tim Healy on to talk about the Mets, and boy, that's kind of a little outdated now already.
So, very outdated.
Yeah. So we were just talking some crazy things happened in the middle of the night. Lou, why don't you? I know you had a question.
I mean, listen, we can go back to Willie Randolph being let go in the middle of the night. Chris, you woke me up to this, and and all you texted me was Carlos Correa, and I'm like, why are you like no context? So I automatically go on Google, and I'm like, no, this can't be. Like, no, this can't be. And sure enough, it was. I mean, I'm shocked. Anthony, what was your reaction when this happened? I mean, were you in that same mindset, or you kind of knew something was going on?
No, I didn't know. And when the news had broken earlier in the day, in the afternoon, that Carlos Correa's press conference with the Giants had been canceled, then I think everyone around baseball was trying to figure out what happened. And it was just this collective, okay. And at that time, my first thought was, it would not surprise me at all to see the Mets get back in this thing because, Steve Cohen had just been quoted a few days prior in the New York Post as kind of saying he was regretful of not going harder after Correa or not entering those negotiations earlier because the Mets did have some interest in him. And by the time they had really verbalized that to Scott Boris's agent, they were already so far down the road with the Giants that it just wasn't going to happen. So the thought did go through my mind, but never in a million years did I think it would happen in essentially 12 hours, which is how it unfolded. I thought this would be a longer, drawn-out process. Even if the deal with the Giants did fall through, they would go back to free agency, kind of back to the drawing board, negotiate with other teams. It would be days, if not weeks, before something else got resolved. And so I, like so many other people, woke up, saw my phone in the middle of the night, saw what had happened, and was like, oh my God. I mean, it's just, anything is possible with this team. That's certainly Mets fans. You don't have to be that old to remember a time when that was not the case, but it's you really cannot rule anything out. And you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. I mean, that's really what this was. This was a done deal with the Giants, and all of a sudden it wasn't quite done, and the Mets saw that crack and slipped right through it and scooped up their guy.
Anthony, I have a question just for our viewers and listeners. As the beat writer, so you get waking up to this in the middle of the night. What now? Do you have to address it right away?
Oh yeah. I'm immediately trying to confirm this, but the problem is it was 5 a.m. and everyone was more or less asleep. Although I thought, thankfully, someone was awake and did help me out with that. But yeah, it was. It's major news. You want to get it up as quickly as possible. Obviously, you need to verify and you have to make sure it's correct and all that. But it was a fretful morning for sure. I banged out a story as quickly as I could once I had it confirmed. Managed to get back to sleep for another couple hours because I knew that once 9 o'clock hit, the phone was going to start ringing. It was just going to be nonstop all day. So I managed to get to sleep from like 7:30 to 9, and then I woke back up and it was just all systems go for the rest of the day.
Wow. That's crazy. Now, full disclosure, I'm a Yankee fan.
Yep.
When I see this happening, it's funny. I hearken back to George Steinbrenner, right? Like everybody else does. And throughout the day yesterday, that was kind of the recurring theme was, is this good for baseball, right? You've had people from one end saying yes, from one end saying no. How do you feel about that?
I think it's great for baseball. Anytime an owner is willing to do whatever it takes to win, as opposed to do whatever it takes to be profitable or that sort of thing, I think it's impossible to say that is a bad thing. Now, I don't necessarily fault an owner if they want to run their team a different way. There are definitely different definitions of success in the game. But when you're coming at it from a fan perspective, and this podcast is literally called The Agent and the Fan, right? What fan cares about their owner's pocketbook?
Yeah.
Like that might be how it winds up going, but what fan doesn't want a team to spend as much as possible in pursuit of winning? If it actually drives me crazy sometimes because I see fans and they're talking about how efficient a contract is, and maybe that's a little too much based on the player's projected WAR and this and that. It's like, no, if I'm a fan, spend $800 million is not enough. Spend $1 billion.
I've always felt this way, right? My mindset has always been, if you can't support a team, then you shouldn't have a team. Yes, I'm coming in from a perspective of a Yankee fan, but and I told Chris about this earlier, there were plenty of contracts that Steinbrenner signed that were horrible contracts, right? So it doesn't guarantee anything, right? The one thing I would say for me, this go around, and this is not about Steve Cohen or the Mets, it's the length of contracts, right? The 10, 12, 13 years. So if you are a team who is signing 3 or 4 players to 13-year, 12-year contracts, that doesn't give you wiggle room down the road if there's a really another solid free agent at maybe the same position who is in his prime, where your guy now is not in his prime, but you're paying him like he's in his prime and you have nowhere to move him.
Yeah, it just means you got to get it right at the start, because most likely none of these contracts are going to look great at the end when you get to the point where these guys are 38, 39, 40 years old and still making a lot of money. So you need to get all-star premium caliber production from these guys right now, next year, for the next 3, 4, 5 years while they are in their primes, because that's what you're paying for. No GM is signing a player to a 13-year deal being like, I know this guy's going to be really good in 13 years. It's just not realistic. But you want him to be really, really good now, be a cornerstone of your franchise, and you can deal with that fallout later if he winds up going downhill at the end.
What do you do with Pete Alonso now?
Well, he'll still be part of the best infield out there.
If you're Pete Alonso, you're like, wait a minute, all this money.
You mean contract wise? You mean
contract wise? Yeah. I've been getting a lot of questions about that, and it's tough because I know how much Pete Alonso means to the fan base. And I'm not sitting here telling you that he's not going to sign a long-term deal, but if you look at it from an ownership front office perspective, Steve Cohen has shelled out over $800 million this offseason. He's got Pete Alonso under team control for 2 more years. Probably not a ton of incentive to dish out even more money on a huge contract for a guy that you have anyway for the next 2 years. And you flip it from Pete Alonso's perspective, what incentive does he have to take a penny under what he would get on the open market? He's already played for 4 years now. He has established himself as one of the premier sluggers in the game. So I don't see much incentive for him to be like, you know what? I love the Mets. I want to be here for my whole career. So I'm going to give them 80 cents on the dollar to sign me long term. It just doesn't really work like that. So you put those two factors together, I would be pretty surprised if something gets done this offseason with Alonso. Maybe a year down the tracks, the situation looks different and you figure it out. But it's going to take full market value to lock him up. And if you're the Mets, and that's the case, you just say, all right, let's wait 2 years and hope we can sign him then.
And Chris, I mean, this is more up your alley. For me, to Anthony, to your point, he shouldn't have to take a hometown discount. And if I'm any Met player, as after seeing what this owner did, there is no hometown discount.
Yeah, and I'm sure, this is a different ownership, a different front office from the one that was in place in 2019. But gosh, if they had extended Pete Alonso back then when he first came up, they certainly could have been playing out right now on a very team-friendly deal. I do believe Pete is the type of guy who would have strongly considered that kind of contract. He was so eager. He was so happy to be a member of the Mets organization. And if you remember, I mean, it seems almost silly now, but there were a lot of question marks back then about how good this guy really was. So we probably could have gotten him pretty cheap back then. That window has long since closed.
Listen, as productive and as great of a player as he's been, and certainly a great citizen and all those things that you're looking for, it's a lot of the things that we're used to can kind of be thrown out the window now. And you're seeing what's going on now. They're trying to win now and take it one step at a time. He made this promise that Steve Cohen that he's going to win a World Series, and he's doing everything he can, and that's one thing no one's going to take away from him. He's going to put it all on the table. He's showing it every day.
Yeah, and look, there's something to be said for sure for a guy like Pete Alonso, who has been such a model citizen since he's been here. I mean, we saw it with David Wright, even under a regime that was not known for spending lavishly on players. They recognized that was a generational type player, but also human that they wanted to extend for. So, the Mets kind of have a lot of those guys just in terms of it's a very good clubhouse right now, and they obviously have a lot of very good baseball players as well. But if push comes to shove, whether it's this year, next year, or in 2 years when Pete Alonso is a free agent, and Steve Cohen says this guy means a lot to our franchise, I think we should re-sign him. There's no reason why the Mets won't be the top bidder out there. And if that's the case, there's no reason why Pete Alonso won't be back. I don't think if you're the Mets under Steve Cohen, you have to fear your stars going to free agency like some franchises do. Some franchises, their top players go to free agency. That's it. Boom, they're gone. They just know there's no way they're going to be able to re-sign those guys. Mets now are more like you just saw with the Yankees and Aaron Judge. Like, no, this is our guy. He means so much to us. We will not be outbid on him. That's how the Mets can operate if they determine that's Pete Alonso or anyone else in house that they want to extend.
I think a lot of it'll depend on how things play out over the next couple of years for that. But I tend to agree with what you're saying, because I think they said there's not a real incentive on either side, unless ownership just goes out and throws caution to the wind one last time here. So I would imagine.
Anthony, a two-part question, and again, from a Yankee perspective, being a Yankee fan, when the Yankees were winning their championships starting in '96, it was built on the core, but where I think they kind of went sideways when they started trying to get an all-star at every position. I don't think in baseball you can win that way. It looks good on paper and it looks wonderful, but you need grinders, you need guys like that on a day-to-day basis. And my other point is, now that the Mets are the hunted, how do you think the fan base, because this is all new for them, right? It's a lot different dynamic when you're being hunted as opposed to you being, this sweet, team that everybody loves. Now you're not. Now you're the big bad wolves. How is the Met fan reacting, you think? And B, how is it going to, parlay that to the players? How are the players going to be that?
Yeah, look, I think there's a little bit of revisionist history going on among the fan base, because you've got a lot of people who for a long time were used to kind of being kid brother and looking up at the Yankees and being like, well, if that's how you're going to win it, then we wouldn't want to win it. And now, not that the roles are reversed, but the Mets have become that type of team. And suddenly it's a little more okay than it used to be. But look, I get it. You have a loyalty to a franchise, and a lot of people are going to have a loyalty to that franchise regardless of how they operate. And frankly, if you're a Mets fan right now, this is very fun. Maybe years down the line, if it doesn't work out, it takes on a different color. But for right now, I think if you're a Mets fan, you're just loving every bit of this. And to answer your first question, I mean, look, this isn't Steve Cohen's preference for how to run a team. It's not like he set out here, bought the team, been like, you know what, I want to spend as much of my money as possible and risk taking losses on this franchise and this, that, and the other. Like, no. He wants to win. And ideally, you would rather win cheaply than more expensive. But there was a realization and a recognition that the way the franchise was coming from such a low place in terms of the depth of the roster and some of the star power on their roster, and even other areas of the organization, whether it's analytics, front office, scouting, all these things that they've built up. There was a realization that the way to do this quickly, and if we want to win a World Series in the short term, we're going to have to spend a lot of money now. And then hopefully 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, we have built everything up, farm system included, that we're going to have cheaper ways to do this. And we're not going to have to go out and have a $380 million payroll in the future.
Like the Dodgers now.
Exactly. It's pretty much point blank following the model the Dodgers did about 15 years ago when their sale of the team. You've seen them scale back. At some point in the future, whether it's 5 years, 8 years, 10 years down the line, you will see the Mets scale back. But for now, bonanza's on.
So what happens to a guy like Ronnie Mauricio now?
Yeah, probably traded. If you're asking me exactly what happens, you never know. I mean, he's an athletic guy. Asking about him specifically, he could ultimately wind up at second base. He could even wind up in center field. But the Mets have a lot of good position player prospects, whether it's Mauricio, Brett Beatty is another one who's kind of getting boxed out now by Carlos Correa, Mark Vientos. They've got two great catchers in the organization. Like, not all of these guys are going to stick. There's just not enough, even if they all pan out baseball-wise, which is unlikely. There's just not enough spots on the diamond. So it does free the Mets up to be flexible with trades. They've been pretty reticent to trade their top flight guys, but if they want to now, you're hearing rumors about Liam Hendricks. Could the Mets bring on another top flight reliever? Well, you can afford to part with some of those guys now, even though they're blue chippers and they're guys that you don't want to necessarily see go play for someone else. Because you have spent so much and filled these spots in the diamond with guys who are going to be here for 10 plus years, you can kind of afford to get rid of some of your prospects.
So this is what's interesting to me, because I've been hearing that Carlos Carrasco is on the trade market. But if I'm looking at it from a Met standpoint, I'm like, why would I do that? I've invested so much money on this team. Do I really want to leave it up to rookies, essentially, or second tier guys at the bottom of the rotation to potentially fill that role. If I'm all in, I'm all in.
I agree completely. And I think pitching is a different animal. I certainly would not trade Carlos Carrasco for that reason. You're going to spend $380 million on payroll, and then you're going to trade a guy just so you can save $13 million. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Position player wise is a little different. You just saw the Mets swing a trade. They sent James McCann to the Orioles. That one made sense. They save a little bit of money, which is good. Not necessarily necessary, but it's good.
You had 4 catchers.
Maybe do more things midseason, but that was more because there was a roster crunch. They had signed Omar Narvaez. They had Tomas Nido. They do have Francisco Alvarez still coming up. So there really wasn't much need for them to sit back and try and squeeze some production out of James McCann. You might as well save the money there. If the Mets wind up going and maybe trading Eduardo Escobar, for example, I'm not quite as sold as that because I think he can still provide a lot of value as a clubhouse guy and also as a bench bat, as a DH guy, someone who can really provide you value. But my point is more, you're not going to lose as much depth-wise there as you would if you take away a starting pitcher who's capable of throwing 150 innings for you. You lose that, and then someone else gets hurt, and then someone else gets hurt. All of a sudden, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and I think, Lou, to your original point, the original question, I think like Jeff McNeil's an all-star, and he won the batting title, but he's also a grinder. Mark Canha, you got Vogelbach, Nido. I mean, so you got your share of these types of guys.
Well, that's the thing. And just because someone's making $300 million doesn't mean they can't be a grinder.
Exactly.
A lot of people need to be a grinder to get to that. Everything you hear about Carlos Correa, for example, is that he is that kind of guy. He plays with a chip on his shoulder. So, certainly some people, you hear the stereotype, right? You get paid and then you just kind of mail it in a little bit. But I think by and large, most people are not that way. I mean, gosh, look at Max Scherzer. Signing the biggest AAV by far in Major League history. I don't think anyone would accuse him of mailing it in.
I think if you're at that level, you are a competitor.
No, and listen. I've been in the business a long time and worked with a lot of different players and personalities. There are some, but for the most part, these guys got to where they got because they are so competitive. And even if they know their futures are set and they don't have to worry about these things and their kids are, set for life, they still are competitors. That's how they got to where they got. So.
No, I agree. I mean, listen, I think all of them in most rosters are like that, right? There's the outlier who got his money and he's okay. But no, these guys, and what I mean by that, I don't mean that Carlos Correa isn't a grinder. Don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is that you had some of those supplemental players that weren't a perennial all-star, but like give a Yankee example, Scott Brosius. Scott Brosius wasn't anything near an all-star, but there's certain qualities, right? Jeff McNeil has that, I think, with the Mets. And that's kind of where along the lines that I was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, everyone is going to want to pay attention to Carlos Correa and to Justin Verlander and to all these guys who are getting the big money contracts. But, there are other things the Mets are doing. They've gone out and they've signed a whole host of hard-throwing relievers that you've never heard of.
They're bullpen.
Some of these moves, I mentioned Eduardo Escobar on the bench. They just signed Danny Mendick from the White Sox. These are things that winning teams do when it's not about those 26 players as much as it's about going 40 players deep on the roster. It's not about your starting 5 so much as it's about your starting 8 or 9. To be good, you need to be good in 2 ways. And Billy Epler, the Mets GM, has talked about this. You need to be good to be the best team over 162 games because you're not getting anywhere if you don't make the playoffs. But then you also have to be good, in the playoffs, and you need to be able to kind of take it to that gear where your best players can beat their best players at the end. So it needs to be both. But for the first part, to be good over 162, it takes a lot of players. It takes a lot of contributions from a lot of guys, grinders, etc. And when you're relying on big league professionals to come off your bench in your bullpen to fill in your rotation when guys get hurt, that's probably going to go better for you than if you're relying on guys who you're just calling up from AAA, AA, who've never really seen this before, who maybe aren't top prospects. That's what the Mets have done in the past, and it hasn't always gone great.
Yeah.
For sure.
I agree. I think they're going to have a great season. I think, like any season, it comes down to the postseason, and that's a crapshoot.
Yeah, absolutely. And just because the Mets are built in this way, and they're obviously a great team on paper, and I think we'd all be shocked if they don't make the playoffs. It really doesn't guarantee them anything. Once they get in that tournament, they're going to be playing other good teams. They're just as liable to be shut down by a good pitcher, like saw Joe Musgrove in the wild card game. He could still beat a very good lineup, even though it's a better lineup than you had. So there are no guarantees. All you can do is put yourself in the best possible position, and that is what the Mets have done.
We say in baseball, good pitching gets out good hitting, and if you get hot down the stretch, and that's kind of what happened to the Mets this past season.
Yeah.
Their pitching did not come through, and at least nobody, and they got shut down a few times, and that was it.
And that's the concern for this team as well. If there's a way that this season is going to go south for the Mets, it's going to be because you're relying on 40-year-old Justin Verlander, 39-year-old Max Scherzer. Every member of your starting five is 30 years old or above. Like, that could come back to hurt them. Guys could get hurt. Guys could miss significant time. And if that happens, yeah, it could go south. But it's a really good rotation. It's a really good roster. So we'll see who's healthy at the end. We'll see how those guys are pitching at the end. If they're pitching even remotely close to their capabilities, Mets are going to have a shot.
Do they need to win a championship for this to be considered a success?
Yeah, I think within the next, not necessarily this year, but within the next 3-4 years, while they're doing this, while they're spending all this money and waiting for other areas of their organization, including the farm system, to mature. Yeah, I don't think you spend this type of money without saying our goal is to win a championship. Now, again, how many years did the Dodgers do it without winning? Would you say they're not a success? They made the playoffs every year. They made deep runs a bunch. That could very well be the Mets' fate, but I don't think anyone in the organization is saying, oh, well, if we, make a few division series here and go as far as the NLCS at some point, we're going to be happy. No, they want to win a championship, and they should.
Definitely so. This is a great team. Great team.
It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, but it should be a lot of fun. And I think to your original point, Anthony, I think that, it's as a fan, you got to be excited as a Met fan. And there's a lot of long tortured Mets fans that I know, and maybe possibly in my own family. And and so I think it's going to be a fun season, and it should be exciting. And I agree with you 100%. I think this is good for baseball. That's just not the agent in me. I think, listen, these guys are smart businessmen. That's how Steve Cohen didn't get his billions, by being a dummy. He's a smart man. He's not spending money that he doesn't have, and he doesn't think he's gonna make off well on this financially as well. So he knows what he's doing, and he's lucky enough to have the resources to be able to do it and pull the trigger on these things. Maybe some other teams aren't. That's unfortunate for them, but I think in this case the Mets are very fortunate to have an owner who not only has the money but is willing to spend it, and they're going to need it because the division is not a walkover. This isn't, with the Phillies doing what they did and improving themselves, and the Braves being the Braves, having done a really nice job of kind of what we were discussing, maybe the Mets do down the road, of locking these guys in. They're in a great spot too. So it's going to be a dogfight for sure.
It's going to be a dogfight. Anthony, so with that said, great division the Mets are in. What today, right? It's hard to predict, come April 1st, but today, where do you think they land?
I think Correa puts them over the top for me. If you had asked me that 2 days ago, I would have said they built a really good team, but the Braves have won this 4 or 5 years running.
Yeah.
They're bringing back a really good team as well. I'm sure they weren't thrilled to lose Dansby Swanson, but if anyone can kind of paper that over, it is Atlanta. But Correa, for me, fills a really big need for them. It gives them one of the best, if not the best, lineups in baseball to go along with one of the best rotations, a pretty good bullpen as well. There's no real obvious weakness on paper here when it comes to this Mets team. So, yeah, for me, it is the Mets, and that's not saying the Braves or even the Phillies can't come away with the division. 3 really good teams are going to be duking it out, as you said, but I think the Mets are just a hair better than those other two.
And the thing is also, you just got, health is huge. We touched on it a bit, but health is so important, and who could stay the healthiest and who can get through the, the grind of the 162 game season. that's going to be huge. If teams go down and lose guys, then that's going to change the face of this.
Yeah, and they will. All three of those teams will. Every team in baseball will. But
No question.
How does it happen? When does it happen? How does it affect you? How quickly can you come back? The Mets are susceptible, as I said. They're relying on really old starting pitching, but that doesn't mean they can't stay healthy.
And you said it earlier in that, it's not your starting 5, it's your starting 8 or 9, because like you said, I mean, you can't expect these guys to get through the season and do 100% healthy and not miss a start here and there, or God willing, that it won't be anything more than that. But when who are the guys that are going to step up? Is there a David Peterson or guys like that who are going to come up and not only pick up the slack but rise to the occasion? You see that quite often too, where guys like that will step up, and all of a sudden next year at this time we're talking about David Peterson as being in the middle of the rotation as opposed to on the periphery.
Absolutely. And that's to the earlier question about guys who grind. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's a guy who Peterson's a great example of someone who can come in and might be real disappointed because there's a good chance he doesn't make the opening day rotation or even the opening day roster. But can he go down there, grind at Syracuse for a few weeks, and then come back up and be that guy when it's his turn as if nothing had happened? That can be very, very, very well can be the difference between winning a division and not.
No question. I think last year was tough. Ending obviously was brutal with the pitching. I think Starling Marte not being in the lineup was a killer for them because he was really a key cog in that lineup. And I do think they were definitely weaker down at the bottom of the lineup. And now, like you said, by bringing in Correa and it just extends the lineup, and Marte comes back healthy. You got a juggernaut there.
Is Guillorme part of this team?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Okay. Yeah, he's the perfect.
There's another grinder.
Super sub for them. Yeah, he can fill in at any infield position. He'll be for sure be a part of that opening day bench.
Yeah. That's amazing. The amazing Mets.
Anthony, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's really great to have you. It was a pleasure to have you on. Great insight. We're looking forward to keeping posted on the Mets through all your work over at MLB.com. Thank you again for joining us. Hopefully, maybe next once the new year comes around, we'll get you back on again.
All right, guys. Chris, Lou, thanks.
All right, that was great. Anthony is a great guy and certainly smart, knowledgeable, and it was good to have him. And obviously, this is the hot topic right now. So it was good to hear his insight on it, and that was great.
Definitely. So one of the things I didn't bring up with him, I didn't delve into too much, and he spoke on it a little bit, was the owners spending money. I understand maybe the Pittsburgh owner who's maybe worth $3 billion, maybe I can understand that a little bit. But if you have these upper tier teams like the Texas Rangers who have a lot of money, both LA teams, San Francisco, they can play with Steve Cohen, right? Because what's the difference between 10 billion and 17 billion? You know what I mean? Like, so to me, the whole Steve Cohen, I think it gets overplayed because he's the richest owner.
Well, but he's just so much richer than everybody else.
Yeah, but my point is, like, if he's worth 17 and the other guy's worth 10 billion, what does that mean in the scale of you putting up a team, a competitive team? It means nothing.
Well, like you said, everybody's got their own way of.
But yeah, I mean, some of these guys look at it more as an investment and treat it as such, which I feel for those fans of those cities, right? You have the fan, the San Diego fan who's loving life right now because their owner's going
right, but it hasn't always been like that.
Exactly, but I think that owner's realizing, like, you got to spend the money, and you have the money, and again, these guys, are owning a team. To your point, Chris, they're not dumb. They are smart businessmen. That's how they became billionaires. And I think a lot of them are starting to realize, it's like, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. If you build a successful team, you're going to get sold out crowds. You're going to get the merchandising, everything that comes with that. And that's where I feel bad for teams like the Pirates, who I don't want to criticize their ownership. I don't know their ownership as much, but it just seems to me like they're 2 steps up, 2 steps down. They get some really good draft picks, and then they just never, now they're talking about trading the left fielder. I feel bad for that city.
Yeah. No, it is what it is. It's just big market, small market. This has gone on in baseball for a long, long time. And sometimes these teams are well put together and they win. And like I said, more often than not, it's not the case. But yeah, I can understand what you're saying. And obviously, as an agent, you want everybody to spend a lot of money especially on your clients. So,
well, listen, I think that it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Toronto. Because they're owned by a corporation, right?
Yep.
And they got two great players that are going to be free agents,
Yep.
hot free agents.
Yep.
So listen, the Braves are owned by a corporation.
Yep.
They have a lot of money, so these guys can do a lot of things. If I'm a Met fan, I'm excited, I'm ecstatic, and I'm like, bring it all, bring it on.
Yeah.
And if your team is not spending money, then
Oh yeah, I mean, I would want I'd imagine a lot of, like you said, small market fans are banging their heads against the wall every time they see a new signing by the Mets or one of these big market teams. So it's it's part of the landscape as we stand here today, and that's just the way it is at this point. So they're using analytics and other things to try and compete and stay in there. And like you said, once you get to the tournament,
anything can happen.
Anything can happen, and we've seen it happen.
Anyway, Chris, man, this has been fun, man. This was a great one.
Yep.
What are you doing? What are you doing for the holidays? I think you're gonna stay at home. What are you gonna do?
We are going to celebrate with some family over the weekend, and then we may take a little trip. We'll see. Might be a trip involved, but I can't confirm or deny. You never know. You never know with the Leibles.
Nice. Well, listen, have a great holiday.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa to everybody out there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys soon.
We'll see you next year.